without addressing the issues outlined. Please pause and treat this decision and Hagley Park the gravitas they deserve. And thank you from Susan Williams.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having that read into the record. Much appreciated. Right, now, councillors, we'll move on to item 20, and the recommendations from staff sit in front of us. So if I could invite staff to present the report. I just think just a brief introduction and perhaps addressing some of the issues that have been raised that need to be responded to. Thank you.
Thank you. By means of introduction, the report in front of you is to consider as landlord effectively whether or not you approve of the modification of the building, or in this case deconstruction and reconstruction. And also a couple of key points. The modified building still sits within the lease area that the Canterbury Cricket Trust hold. A lot of the discussion has been about RMA matters, and I'll just point out that Council has received the new application for a resource consent. That has been sent out to all the members of the Hagley Park Reference Group, so that can be considered thoroughly, and comment can be made back to the planners. The notion of, or the question relating to, do you do a landlord consent first or do you do a resource consent first, is not an uncommon one that we have around many lease situations for facilities on recreation reserves. It doesn't apply here, but I'll just make this comment. What we tend to have trouble with is people go and get a resource consent and then they think they're away and laughing. And then we have to remind them, no, you've actually got to get the landlord's approval. So you can go both ways, frankly. And that's something that you may wish to consider today. With regard to the terminology major sports facility, it is a technical term, I believe, that as it sits in the district plan, that any facility over 300 square metres is termed a major sports facility. We already have at least two on Hagley Park. We have the netball centre and we have the golf club. That would now be termed major sports facilities. So that's just to put it in context for you. Felix, you may wish to elaborate on that, or essentially that's all we can really add to the conversation so far, and happy to answer any questions.
Councillors, Sarah Templeton.
Thanks for clarifying that, Andrew. So the major sports facility terminology that's used in the 2018 consent refers to the current size of the facility. Does it allow for a greater facility to be built in the future? And if it did, would council still need to do a separate decision to allow that as landholder?
Yes.
So it does allow for something bigger in the future because it's a facility, or no, but we would still need to make a decision?
You need to clarify your question. Are you saying specifically would it allow the Canterbury Cricket Trust to build a larger facility?
Yeah, does just having the term major sports facility?
Not without further approval. So if they decided they wanted to put a third story on the building or whatever it was, it goes back through this same process.
Okay.
As the landlord, you have to agree to any modifications to any building.
Yeah. Okay. And the footprint of the building, does that take up the new footprint? It looks like it takes some hard surface and a small sliver of green at the back, or is that mostly hard surface it's going on? So is it taking more green space away, for example?
It's kind of grey space, to be frank.
Yeah,
there is a modification to the footprint, and you'll be aware that there's a total increase of 70 square metres.
Yeah, but no tree removal for any of the building work or any of that?
No.
No, thanks.
Was the increase at the ground level, was that at the request of the council in terms of the access to the new facilities that would be made available?
Not explicitly. Council obviously are very keen to be able to get access to those changing rooms, in particular to support women's cricket on the number, what we call the number 2 or the nursery ground. I guess the point to remember is there's always a lot of cricket going on in summer. 20 odd games through Christ College, the Polo Grounds, and all of Hospital Corner and so forth. And there are very few change facilities available. So we are very keen to be able to access those buildings for the wider community. The Canterbury Cricket Trust's designers designed the building to accommodate that, but not explicitly at our request.
Right. But they were aware that we had a desire to be able to utilise them as a public facility.
Absolutely.
Okay, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just a quick one based off Anne's presentation, which I thought was really useful. It just talks about there the under duress and, the making of decisions. Are we comfortable in our legal position on proceeding forward today, making a decision?
On this decision, yes.
Yep. Yeah, cool. Well, in that case, I'm happy to move it if you need to, just as a starting point.
Yep. I'll second it then. So, no, it doesn't matter. Fine. Pauline, you had a question.
Thank you. Just with regard to the extra footprint of, you saying 70 square metres? I thought I heard 95.
I think it's 95.
I was at 95.
Yeah, 95.
My apologies.
So that's contained in the original lease agreement. What is the usage of that in the lease? Is it as green space?
Primarily, it is to accommodate those changing facilities.
So it's to
The
allow,
increase
to
in
allow the
footprint
building.
has been driven by the desire to have improved change facilities, and in particular, the appropriate facilities to support female athletes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, Yanni and then Anne.
Yeah, I was just interested in the in our report we were told that the City Council and the Trust worked on a range of funding initiatives for parks and community organisational projects, and that resulted in a $610,000 grant. How was that decided? Like, we've got other projects that come to mind, so where was that
I
highlighted?
can't answer that question, sorry. That was facilitated by the Sport and Recreation team. We'd have to get some advice from them.
The question we're being asked today, though, is in relation to the request to approval to demolish and replace the building. So there is
Correct.
already a lease
We're not
in
considering
place.
funding.
No.
So, but without that funding, this project wouldn't go ahead.
No, obviously without funding the project will not go ahead, but there is no council funding associated to this project.
We've already heard that. We heard that very clearly from the question that was asked and answered.
So the funding from Sport New Zealand, it goes directly to the trust. It doesn't come through council.
No.
Is that correct?
No, council has no role.
Okay. Just wanted to check on this whole issue of commercial use and your sense of what would be permissible under the Hagley Park Management Plan.
Well, under the Reserves Act, no commercial use is permissible.
Right. So the idea of having, say, indoor cricket, professional, commercial type, people paying to go and play, like indoor
That's
sports.
not technically considered commercial use if it's supporting that community sport level. For example, we have a golf course on Hagley Park that you must pay to be able to play.
Right.
So that's consistent all over the country in terms of how community level sport operates.
So they can have a community level of activity
Yeah.
that people pay to
But a
play,
commercial
as long
entity
as
cannot go in and use those facilities for commercial gain purposes.
So as long as the revenue raised from that goes back into the charitable
Absolutely.
purpose, then it's okay.
It must be a not-for-profit organisation.
Right. How does that impact on, say, our lease fees or licence to occupy charging? Like, how do we work out how much we would charge for the lease of the space?
I believe it's a pretty standard process. Felix, do you have
That's just the lease, the rent is determined on the basis of the sports covenant community group's policy. which is a discounted rate for community groups and sports clubs. You'll be familiar with that.
Right.
This is a non-for-profit operation.
But it
It's
will
not
have
commercial.
professional use as well.
It's like all sports facilities do. For example, Ngāpunawai has an international hockey facility on it. It can host, but it's not the primary use. You know, those things occur once every 2 years.
Yeah. Just, did the other question I had was, did we get, at what stage would our urban design team provide advice over?
During the resource consenting process.
Right,
The
but,
application was received on Monday. It's been shared with the Hagley Park Reference Group, and it goes through its normal RMA process.
right, so in terms of the controls over the lease, there's nothing that we could do in terms of urban design or control of, say, advertising signage?
Absolutely, you can in the lease. You can state that there should be no advertising signage. That's not uncommon in reserves.
Yeah, so have you got any sense of what's permissible and what we may like to restrict?
Look, off the top of my head, no. It is a challenge all over the city. If you drive past Burnside Park right now, they have a very large sign for a commercial operator on their community facility.
Yeah.
I don't have that policy in my head, sorry.
Right.
But-
Okay. I mean, I guess the concern
But
is
we
that,
work quite closely with clubs to try to support them to be sustainable without pushing
Yeah.
the limits.
but having a whole bunch of, private advertising in Hagley Park wouldn't
Doesn't
be
happen.
something that would be,
No.
That wouldn't be permitted under the terms of the lease. It's certainly not in terms of the landlord approval.
thank you.
Not just Hagley Park, all of our parks. We apply consistent policies to all of our parks.
Anne?
Kia ora, thank you. We've heard a lot about cricket, but my understanding is that it's also going to be used for other sports. Can you talk about that a bit more?
That's probably a question for the trust, actually.
Okay.
You know, our role here is to put in front of you the modification to the building,
Yeah.
not the use of the building, in a sporting context.
Yeah, I
But
guess
it's a very common thing, whether it's a school gymnasium or a council building or whatever, they tend to want to fill them up and
yeah.
use those spaces.
So I guess I'm trying to get at the fact that it will be really beneficial, not just to cricket, but to the whole community, use really, I guess.
Yeah, again, but that's a decision. Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes,
it can
yes.
facilitate other activity,
Yeah,
just like the horticultural hall did.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Remembering it used to be cricket nets and then it was modified.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Right, Andrew?
Thank you. In the supporting notes and in the deputation from the Civic Trust, under the discussion about the use of the term major sports facility, there are a number of bullet points that refer to matters that are not disclosed in the staff report. So the requirement of approval by council of a major sports facility, the 2018 consenting, and also the fact that the resource consent required for the proposed building is dated the 3rd of March 2021, rather than been application pending. Are any of those things omissions and things that should be reported on, or are any of them relevant to the particular matter we're considering today? That's the first of two questions I've got.
So I guess the biggest challenge whenever you consider a landlord's consent is the obvious interdependency of an RMA decision. But technically, you are making a decision on whether or not you accept the demolition of the building and the rebuild of a replacement building on the same site. It's very, council typically doesn't have a role to play in terms of councillors sitting around the table in most RMA decisions. They're done by independent commissioners. So it's very difficult for me to sort of say things are missing because the application for the RMA has just been received long after this report was written. What I can say about the RMA, and there are people behind me that can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, is that the conditions that were part of the consent that the horticultural hall had were the conditions that were novated across to the trust. Is that correct? Correct. So some of those conditions we're quite uncomfortable with because they are not consistent with the lease that the Horticultural Society had, nor have been transferred across. So now that we have a new resource consent application, we have that opportunity to address those inconsistencies, but through an RMA process, not this process. Does that make sense?
Yep. So that leads to a point that Lindsay Carswell made, and I think, and I'm going to ask for some clarification here, that you, Andrew, referred to in some of your opening comments. Lindsay asked the question, why would you not get the resource consent approval first and then deal with these matters? And I think I heard you in your opening remarks saying that's an approach you might decide to take, and I think it was that matter that you were referring to. I mean, this is about timing and sequencing, but you know, is there merit in waiting for the resource application, a resource consent application to run its course and the decision to be made prior to granting the approvals? Would there be any merit or advantage in that?
It's hard to say that there's merit or advantage. We always encourage people, typically, to get the landlord's consent before they go to the significant expense, because not-for-profit, before they go to those significant expenses to get a resource consent. So if the landlord has no interest in adopting a change, why would you go and get your resource consent? As I say, it's very difficult to sort of keep the matters separate, and we've had this with several situations that have come to the light, particularly with Hagley Park, whether it was lights or other matters. Because I have no idea what the Commissioner will look at, what the planners will do in terms of applying the rules, I don't know if I can honestly answer that question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, what you have done is given some rationale for the way that it would be set out in the way it is today, and the timing would be in the order that's proposed in the paper. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it? Pauline.
Mine is probably more a question of the trust, but I'll ask Andrew anyway. But would it be possible for this project to proceed without extending the footprint? They would obviously have to reduce...
That is very much a question for the designers.
And you can't answer that?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm... Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to take advice, but I'm quite happy to have the trust come back and answer that question if that's permissible under standing orders. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Your Worship. The only reason for the change or the increase was that the specifications for the changing rooms, toilets and showers had to be a particular size, and if we didn't increase that footprint to accommodate that, number one, we wouldn't have got the funding and it wouldn't have been a legacy project for Christchurch, and number two, we would have to compromise on the 5 lanes that we've designed and put in place as a result of the advice that we've received both from New Zealand Cricket and Dale Hagley, who did international cricket indoor facilities in Dubai and elsewhere. So for it to be effective for full training situations, we need to keep what is regarded as a minimum in terms of the size of the 5 lanes. The size of the changing facilities took it over that amount. So as has been confirmed, it's 95 square metres on the footprint, but the whole building is reduced in size, and it's well within the leased area of what has been granted to the Trust in terms of the lease through to 2044. So we're not encroaching on any green space or anything else, it's simply within that footprint.
Yeah, so I think it's that we obviously had a design which met the existing footprint, and then the change rooms beefed it up. So two ways we looked at when people asked a question about, you know, how do you reduce the footprint. One is you do away with that larger change room and just have a smaller one serving the training space. Or you could, in theory, just carve off a bit of the extra area in the main sports hall. When you actually look at what tangible benefit that would be, you'd probably take it away from the kind of the stream side or the riverside, which are the trees, and from all public perceptions of the building, it'll look exactly the same as what it does now. So if you carve, say, 2 metres off the sports hall, or 3 metres, it reduces the functionality of the main sports hall. But, you know, from practical terms, it'll look exactly the same because you don't see that perspective. You'll just have a bigger amount of, I guess, open space between those trees in the building. So practically it will still proceed, but you would potentially lose a lot of functionality and potentially the dual use and potentially the community use, which we just see as beneficial.
I'd just add as well that for the resource consent process, one of the key considerations both in the application but for council and ultimately the commissioner deciding will be the differences between the proposed building and the consented building and the existing building. So looking at where it comes back in or where it goes further out, what space it's occupying, what it looks like, and whether that's appropriate or not, having regard to what the district plan expects for Hagley Park in that zone.
Thank you. And, so, will they also be looking at that issue of creep that we hear about?
In brief, yes. Yes, that and the appropriateness of the activity. Yep.
Thank you.
So, is this a question for the trust or? Right. Okay.
Will with the increasing footprint of the building, what would the effect of that lost open space be to the trust? In other words, like what has it been used for, I guess, over the period up till now?
What was it? Clarify that.
Well, the land that the building's increasing in its footprint. So there's the outside area at the moment. What has that bit that will be lost when the footprint increases? What has it been used for up until this point?
Yeah, so the building footprint sits within a larger lease sort of footprint. So one point of note that comes back in relation to green space, we're actually providing afterwards the same amount of impervious surfaces. So the buildings get bigger, but we are providing some more green space on the car park side to offset the bit of the green space currently there in the building on the southern side. So the amount of, I guess, hard standing areas, being it asphalt or building, is exactly the same between now and what we're looking at proposing to do. So in theory, the amount of green space or soft space is exactly the same before and after.
Yeah, but my question is, what is that exact piece of land used for currently?
Okay, so on the south side of the building, it's just a grass strip against the building, which the groundsman uses for sort of storage space, and in the past, between the building and the river, again, it's been used traditionally as outdoor sort of storage space for goalposts and other sports sort of stuff at the moment. So
will those things then be stored inside?
Well, the new groundsman sheds around there have been built now, so I believe the intent is a lot of those storage aspects will be included in the council's groundsman sheds.
We'll get Andrew to answer the council side. Thank you very much for coming back, Andrew.
So it is currently a very simple bit of grassed open space. There are services under that land, some of that land, or just to the side, and there's a gravel pathway. We are currently putting in new storage facilities so that we can remove the old house. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the driveway up to the current building on the right. That was the old groundsman's house. That's where our staff operate out of right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so once those shedding facilities are finished, that will get all removed and returned to open space to improve the overall aesthetic. So in terms of what's it used for, very little other than storage of a few goalposts and various other.
So my question for you was going to be, why was the lease area including that extra land in the first place? Why wasn't it just for the footprint of the original building originally?
All of it, that's consistent with all of our community leases. We always have a perimeter around the building. I'm not sure why we do that. Felix might, but that's exactly how all the leases work.
All right, okay. Well, look, thank you very much for your taking of questions. Sorry?
Sorry. Andrew, we've had a couple of groups present today, but we haven't had the Hagley Park reference group as a whole present.
No.
What was the overall feedback from the Hagley Park reference group?
Oh, you've got me on the spot now because I haven't been
Okay,
attending.
so I've opened up the minutes.
Yeah. I know that the notion was discussed twice
Yeah.
at two individual reference groups. I wasn't at those meetings, sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, the minutes here, I can circulate them to people. Overall, the Hagley Park reference group are supportive of the concept, but there were some concerns and questions, and they tended to be around the things that were the raised today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think everyone sort of has concerns about the commercialisation
Yeah.
aspect. It's a matter that we struggle to deal with everywhere within reserves.
That's it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Look, thank you very much for your presentation, and I've got the matter moved and seconded, so I'll open it up for debate. Sam, would you like to start off the debate as the mover?
Only really briefly, it seems like an absolute no-brainer to me that we would go ahead and do it. There's no cost to the council. It's effectively replacing like for like in terms of the layout, and I think it's a really useful thing, so we should get on and let them do it.
Okay. Anyone else? Pauline?
Yeah, look, I think the project is admirable. I think it's going to tidy up the whole area. I think the building looks nice and tidy, and losing that caretaker's one will help too. But I'm just very worried about the creep. So I just can't support two. I'll support the rest of it, but I'd really like to see them put it back on the same footprint exactly, because I know what happens. It just goes on and on and on. And we have had the deputations in concern, and particularly what Sarah's just read out there. They also have concerns about this. So I'd really like to see them actually fit it back into the same footprint. So I will not be supporting two.
Tim?
Thank you. I'll be supporting this. I do think it's a really good step forward. I think the question with regards to commercialisation is a really tricky one, which you alluded to, Andrew. But whether it's this, St Martin's Bowls Club or whatever, if organisations can actually take the heat off council's financial support in any way, shape, relevant of what the group is, I think that we've got to seriously look at that and respect that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yanni?
Thank you. I want to acknowledge the generosity that, we've heard that people have given to this project, and I think that's really to be acknowledged, and I'm glad that the Mayor referenced that. I'm just really concerned around two, that I would much rather wait for the consent. So I'm not against what's been proposed, but my personal view is that the consent should come first before we approve the lease, so that we can address any matters that are raised in that. So the other resolutions I think are fine, but really I think at the end of the day, like, Hagley Park is such a special place in our city, and to have a resource consent process not be complete ahead of this, approving the lease, raises a real concern with me. I did have a lot of sympathy for the concerns around the design. One thing that, and I guess everyone will have personal observations, but the white background to the park with the existing pavilion is actually very noticeable, and I'd had a lot of sympathy with some of the comment that was made in the submissions around using different coloured tones to reduce the impact. But that sort of thing, I would hope, gets addressed through the resource consent process, which is why I'd rather that process occur first before we approve the lease. The reality is that cricket is now in Hagley Park. We do have the pavilion there, and really, this has a lot of synergy with that. And I think the other point that we shouldn't lose sight of is the general neutrality of what's being proposed and the support for women's sports and women's participation, because I think that's one of the really positive aspects of this for the Women's World Cup, is that we are making they are proposing to have facilities that are gender neutral, which is, a really significant step forward, and, possibly long overdue, but that this is something that is a really positive benefit of this feature. So I just ask that you record my abstention under 2, because I'd rather wait for the consent.
I'm just going to say that I'm seeking advice on that, because I think that it's just a question of opposing the recommendation, because you can't split it. That's what I think. But anyway, I'm waiting for advice on that.
And if needs be,
Phil?
then needs to pull.
Thank you very much, guys. This, so I'm not there. I'm supporting this because I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. We're getting rid of an old, cold bunker that's probably got asbestos in it and turning it into something that's great. And for worrying about creep, from what I understand, if I understand it correctly, Andrew said the old building at the front, which is being used for the greenkeepers, is going to be bowled and turned into grass. So we're actually getting more grass back than what we're using up. And it's inside the lease area that they already have, so let them do what they like. Thank you.
I've got Melanie, James and Andrew and Aaron.
I mean, in general, I'm in support of this, but I do worry. I mean, I'm copying what Pauline and Yanni have thought, but I do think that it is a concern about the increasing size, and I do understand it's within that leased area, but it does make me wonder why leased areas are larger than the original building footprint. I do think I'd like to have that resource consent process done first as well, so we can add anything else to the lease if we decided as a council to do that. So that's where I'm at.
James?
Kia ora. I don't think I'm going to be here for the vote. I have to leave shortly, but I do want to say that, excuse me, if this was split, I would support everything except for 2, because I'd like to see a different design, so therefore I would be opposed to it all. But in principle, I like the idea of what you're trying to achieve, but I do have a problem with the footprint. But having said that, I have to leave.
Andrew?
Thank you, and likewise, as others have said, there are some aspects of this that will be taken account of through the resource consenting process. Yeah, I mean, certainly I note the answer to the question I asked earlier around timing and sequencing of this. But I would certainly be a lot more coming. I think this is a good project. I think it's it's got huge merit, and the use of it has got huge merit. But yeah, the resource consenting first, and the landlord's permissions or the lease permissions second, really do make a lot of sense to me, given the nature of some of the concerns that have been raised, particularly the increased footprint, the appearance of the building, and some of the matters that have been raised in submissions. In principle, I'm comfortable with it, but yeah, I would far rather see what the resource consent process results in first, so that we know the result of what we're going to be approving, rather than approving these consents and then relying on the resource consent application and process to give us an outcome that we're then comfortable with.
Aaron?
Yeah, I will support this today. I do take note during the deputations that we are the guardians of Hagley Park. We are. Also, will point out that I don't think that anything that's ever built on Hagley Park is ever permanent. Everything that goes there is temporary. And when you look at the history of Hagley Park, there's been many structures on there. Certainly, probably the most startling one was in the 1906-07 exhibition. It was like a 6-storey building was built on there with massive towers and stuff. And then there was a Māori pa built next to Lake Victoria. I kind of wish that had stayed. There's other bits that have come and gone. One of the most colourful parts is that they grew tobacco plants to help fund the park at one point.
Well, I'm glad they don't do that anymore.
It's a colourful history, and it will have a colourful future. The park was drawn up in 1850, and cricket got its first lease in 1860. In the park, so it's been there a long time. It will continue to be there for a long time, And that park is for everyone, and when I look at the cricket matches like the one recently, when 18,000 people were in that little corner of Hagley Park, and it was shown off to the world as we romped the Australians in a game of 2020 cricket. I don't think the romping the Australians is the key to the point I'm trying to make here, but we did beat them very well that particular day. They were definitely by far second best. But that aside, it's a great celebration of sport and of the culture of Christchurch, and it will continue to be there. Will it be there forever? Possibly not. It might move again. It may not be in Hagley Park. None of these buildings will be forever because that's the nature of anything you put on land. But we are the guardians, and for now we keep an eye on it, and I don't think this goes too far beyond probably the original intentions of the use of Hagley Park, and I think that's the main thing we need to keep an eye on today.
Sarah.
Did I mention the cricket?
Thank you. I'm going to support this today, but I'd like to acknowledge the need for the consent to happen before this lease is put into effect, and that is what number 5 puts in place. So there are protections for the consent being in place ahead of the lease being activated. That's really clear in our resolutions today, and it is crucial. Let's remember that this is a sports group, a large and well organised one, but it is a sports group, and it's enabling community sports participation in our city. The costs of a consent are substantial, and we hear this time after time. And if we're not going to support this, we should indicate it now, because for a not-for-profit, it's untenable to have to go through the enormous expense of a resource consent without the certainty that we as council will then approve the building that's consented. It is untenable for a sports group who is a not-for-profit doing work to enable women's cricket to be turned down at this point and have to then suffer those expenses. On International Women's Day, I attended an event where the significant work by New Zealand Cricket to enable more gender equity within the organisation and within the various levels of women playing was outlined by the director, Anna Johnston. It was impressive. They have had an enormous culture change. They are really focused on equity and equality within the game, and this is one more step to do to go along with this. For us to not approve the replacement of the building as the one outlined in the attached plans does our communities a disservice. It does women who play the game in the city a disservice, and I'd really urge my colleagues to vote in favour today.
Jimmy Chen.
Yeah, after listening to the staff and also all those that are the deputation, because paragraph 2, there's the consent issue, need to go to the consenting the process. But your paragraph 5, can combine with paragraph 2, if all those the kind of the attachment plan, attachment B, is obtained, those the consent, then we approve for this one. No any the excuse, no any the argue. But now if we presume, we replace the functioning of the kind of the consenting the hearing, no matter the hearing panel or independent commissioner, but I think this probably is not appropriate. So the paragraph 2, I cannot support, but in principle, I support this one. But paragraph 2, we cannot replace the consenting process. This is my concern.
I'm just going to reinforce what Sarah has said. I just think that an organisation has come to us with a proposal. The advice that we've received from staff essentially is that yes, you can go either which way in terms of which comes first, but if you are to invest the considerable time and expense and resources into going through the resource consent process, then you really do need to know that you've got the council behind you. And that's why I think it is absolutely imperative that we support this recommendation today. And that is for a number of reasons. But I think the most significant of which relates to the nature of the facility that is there at the moment. Its various uses referred to the horticultural hall, I think it was, for a while. It's back to a transitional name. This would approve the naming of the new facility as Sir Richard Hagley Sports Centre. Sir Richard Hagley Sports Centre won't exist unless it meets the criteria for the international standard that they're setting for our city. And if we want an international standard within our central city in this place, and it is appropriate in this place, the decision was made some time ago in relation to the land lease that sits with this. The decision was made as to the location of the oval, working within the concept of what is able to be, facilitated in this space. I just think that we really do owe an obligation to give the cricket fraternity and the community groups that will rely on this facility, to give them the certainty that they need to proceed. I've timed myself out. I was still seeking some advice, so I just 12:46. So I'll just take a 5-minute adjournment just while we quickly get some advice on how to put the vote. Unless you'd like to wrap up the debate, Sam?
Probably only to say I would have spoken a lot longer at the beginning if I'd known people would be opposed to it.
Yeah.
It's outrageous. If we weren't to approve this today, it would send a terrible signal to the city that we block progress, and I just can't for the life of me work out, when we have pragmatic solutions from the staff, that we wouldn't proceed. So I'm appalled we even need to get advice. Everyone should be supporting this, and it's outrageous that they're not.
Well, I'll take a 5-minute adjournment and we'll take the advice and then we'll come back.